Washington Journal continues.
Lawrence Yun is Chief Economist and Senior Vice President with the National Association of Realtors, with us this morning on Washington Journal to talk about housing policy under a Trump administration. In particular, we want to start off with one of the first actions of President Trump, the headline in Bloomberg: Trump reverses Obama's mortgage fee cuts on the first day. What was this action by President Trump, and what does it mean?
The FHA, they had to really come into the market when the housing market was going down. Many of the private lending just pulled back. As a result, in order to at least stabilize the housing market, FHA came in. But those were very difficult times where home values were falling. So their reserve fund has been going down, and as a result, the FHA needed to raise the insurance premium to compensate for some of the depletion in the reserve fund. Now, for the past 5 years, housing market has been recovering very nicely. People are defaulting much less. It's near historic lows. Home values are rising, and therefore it makes sense to reduce some of the insurance premium that has been raised. So that was announced. But it was announced by President Obama at the last minute. So I believe the Trump administration is just saying that, well, any last minute decisions we want to negate, and we will review the numbers and then see what to do. We believe that the HUD Secretary Ben Carson will review the numbers, and as he sees the numbers are much better. It is above the legal threshold in terms of the amount that the FHA need to have. So we believe that Ben Carson will be reducing or recommending the reduction of premiums after he reviews the numbers.
The Washington Post find an area to agree with President Trump on this move. They say Mr. Trump's heartless fee hike, not quite. They say despite Democratic rhetoric, the president's suspension of an FHA fee is justified. How does the National Association of Realtors feel about that?
I think that's a wrong assessment. I think one has to look at the bigger picture. And the big picture is that the economy is rising, but there is a great wealth disparity. And part of the contributing factor for the wealth disparity is that home ownership rate is at a 50-year low. Being at 50-year low, many middle class are unable to participate in housing equity gains. And FHA has been a very good entry point for first-time buyers, moderate income families. And now that the fact that people are not defaulting, the credit standard is much tighter. And so given better economic conditions, people are no longer defaulting. I think it is time to enlarge the middle class. So the home ownership rate at being 50-year low, I don't think this is the direction that the Americans wants to see.
We saw your article on this and home ownership this past week, in which you said to be technical, ownership reached the lowest rate in 50 years in the second quarter of 2016, and there has not been much improvement since. Therefore, we have healthier and happier homeowners, but fewer of them. This trend is the driving force behind the widening wealth inequity in the country. And I'll show this headline this morning about the reports on new housing starts in December. New home sales fell sharply in December. But what overall in 2016, what was that like for new home sales?
The activity, both for new home sales as well as for existing home sales, there was decline towards the end of the year, but that's from the higher mortgage rate that came in December. But for the year as a whole in 2016, for the annual figure, it is the best figure in 10 years. It is not the frenzy activity that occurred back in 2005 with easy mortgage lending, which we don't want to have any repeat of. But now the housing market is recovering on a much solid basis. Credit appears to be a little too tight at the moment, but nonetheless, the people are coming in. There's sizable pent-up demand, in my view. So the home sales at 10-year high, but what is missing in the picture is home ownership rate being at 50-year low.
We're breaking apart our phone lines a little differently for this segment with Lawrence Yun. Homeowners call 202-748-8000. If you rent your home or your apartment, 202-748-8001. And for all others, 202-748-8002. A homeowner in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. Steve, good morning.
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
I can, Steve. Just make sure you mute your television. Go ahead with your comment after that. Oh, we just lost Steve. Lawrence, you mentioned Ben Carson, the incoming Secretary of Housing. What do you think his biggest challenge is right out of the chute?
He's not a realistic person, at least his professional experience, but he has indicated, and his professional experience show that he is a very smart person. And I think what he brings to the picture is first great name recognition. So I think the housing will get much greater attention under Trump administration. And just looking at, what do we make of the American progress? Most Americans, our surveys show that over 90% of Americans at some point in their life wants to be homeowners. They want to own their property. They want to say, this is something that I have acquired and participating in the American dream. So given that picture, that aspiration for home ownership, 50-year low in the home ownership rate, the actuality, I think there is a great opportunity for Secretary Ben Carson to say, let's try to make the American dream come alive again. How do we move it so that we have a sustainable, successful home ownership? Because certainly it provides the ladder of opportunity and progress.
Here's Steve in Sterling, Virginia, who's a homeowner.
Yes, question about what we've seen so far with the one policy change that new President Trump has put into place with FHA for the loan rate change. I believe it went from 72 basis points to 78. I'm sorry if I have the wrong number. That being so fast and really working against first-time home buyers, can we expect from what you're seeing so far under Dr. Carson for this to be a continued trend, not just from FHA, but from other government lending agencies and support agencies for housing?
The changes in mortgage rate, which went from 3.5% before the election to now 4.2%, is coming from the market forces. So this is not a decision made by President Trump or Secretary Carson. It's coming from the market forces. People are anticipating that there will be a greater economic stimulus and hence economic activity, which will push up inflation. And higher inflation is associated with higher interest rates. Other people may view it as, given the stimulus plan of big tax cut, and increased government spending in military and infrastructure, that could lead to much larger budget deficit, and larger budget deficit leads to higher interest rate environment. Mortgage rates are higher, generally negative for home buying environment, but nonetheless, we have to recognize that the under 4% mortgage rate that was the case for most of 2016, these were exceptionally low rates. One can say bonus rates now is somewhat normalizing, inching up. I think the Federal Reserve will probably raise interest rate 3 more times in 2017 and possibly more in 2018. We are now just moving away from the regular low mortgage rate environment. But so the compensating factor has to be job creation. So in a time of higher mortgage rate, first, we need to assure that FHA premium do not rise. In fact, I think there's a room for reduction, but we need that job creation for people to have that income necessary to buy a home.
So to follow up, your thinking is the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates in the next year another 3 times.
In 2017, this year, 3 rounds of rate increase. Mortgage rate do not necessarily follow one-to-one, but nonetheless, just general direction is that interest rate will be rising, both short-term and long-term.
Question for you on Twitter. Maverick asks, Mr. Yoon, let's be clear. Are you saying Trump is postponing the FHA fee reduction is an increase for the majority of low and middle class buyers?
The FHA mortgages traditionally has provided opportunity for people of moderate income and people who are generally younger, first-time buyers. And the FHA premium increase can reduce the size of the pool who can buy a home. So the fact that now the FHA reserve fund is much healthier, is above the legally set limit, there's an opportunity to reduce it. And I think in a few months after the people in the Trump administration reviews the number, I think they will come to the conclusion it makes much more sense to let's push back down to lower insurance premium, that way to revive the middle class. And I think many voters across the country are just concerned about hollowing out of the middle class, but now is a great opportunity to enlarge the middle class through home ownership.
And again, a reminder how we've broken up our phone lines for homeowners, 202-748-8000. If you rent your condo, apartment, home, 202-748-8001. All others, 202-748-8002. In Phoenix, it's Trinidad, who's a renter there.
Yes.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Mr. Yoon.
You're on the air, yeah.
Mr. Yoon,
Yes.
this scenario that you're, concentrating on is home ownership. In the meantime, all the low-income, moderate-income people are renters, and the speculating in realty, home ownership, has ballooned the scale, the rating of renting an apartment. A lot of the counties have a set, say, like, require 1/3 of a person's annual income or monthly income. Well, at this point, most people are paying out 75% of their income, if not the entire income. And also, this whole ballooning impacts the HUD payment scale. That area has to pay more for the going rate of the market renting scale. It's at this point, I would hope that this new administration put some kind of curbs to the rising cost of housing.
All right, Trinidad and Phoenix.
That's a very great question because the rents are rising, and we have not only the low in home ownership rate because of the lack of housing construction, both on the single family as well as for the multi-family in relation to the population. Historically, housing starts should be about 1.5 million new units being built in the country, given the population growth. But we have been under 1 million during the downturn, and we are barely scratching 1.1 million, 1.2 million. And that is why the apartment rents are now rising at 4% year over year, which is the highest rent growth in 8 years. So we have a home values consistently outpacing people's income, but the rents are also outpacing people's income. And this is arising from the fact that we are underproducing new housing units. So I think the focus from the administration has also needs to be building more housing units, or at least incentivize to produce more housing units, because otherwise we could have this major rise in cost for housing, whether buying a home or for renting, because we just don't have enough new housing in relation to the population growth.
What's been the impact of the so-called shared economy, things like Airbnb and Uber, particularly among millennials? Are we seeing millennials start to dive into home ownership?
No, that's not the case. So among the millennials, I think they are financially constrained. First, they are carrying a large student debt. The aggregate student debt has tripled in the past 10 years, and that has been a big hindrance to convert from renting into buying. And as related to the share economy, in some metropolitan market where they don't need to have a car, so that frees up some of the budget to buy a home, but the rents are rising so fast that it's eating up into any of the savings. So to address this housing shortage, there needs to be more construction activity, both on apartment as well as on single family.
To our homeowners line, Mary's in Gales Ferry, Connecticut. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. One of the issues I haven't heard addressed stems from an executive order done by President Kennedy in the early 60s, which unionized the public sector of our nation. That has the ramification this day and age of making these historically low mortgage rates of no effect because of the rising property tax rates. My own property taxes have quadrupled in 30 years. In the last 16 years, the homeowners insurance rates have also quadrupled. Heating oil since 1999 went up to $4 a gallon, hence a $700, $800 oil bill to heat your home in the winter. Unless the government can understand that when you unionize our public sector, you are handing huge, huge deficits down the road. Unfunded pension liabilities in this nation run about $100 trillion. In my own small town, my property taxes run $6,000 a year.
We'll get a response, Mary, on property taxes.
Say in some states, there's a very high property tax. In other states, it's much lower. So there is some regional competition as related to the property tax and how people migrate from one region to another. The overall inflation, at least coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is implying that inflation rate is currently very low, but it is rising because we will no longer get that bonus of the declining gasoline prices anymore. Gasoline prices had fallen from high of $4 to $2. Now, I don't think it will go down to $1. So if it doesn't go to $1, that means there will be other areas where it will begin to push up inflationary pressure. And if one looks at the rent or the owner equivalent rent or home values, those are clearly outpacing people's income. So one way to address some of the rise in cost of living is to assure that we have adequate production. And housing certainly can contribute in lessening that pressure, but more production needs to occur. And in one area which the caller addressed was about the workers, where there is a lack of skilled worker in the construction. So if we can utilize more, say, the community colleges to provide vocational skills, welders, carpenters, the building framers. That will help relieve some of the effects of increasing housing in America.
Let's go to our Redders line next and hear from Convita in Oakland, California.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you, C-SPAN, for taking my call. My question to Mr. Young would be, does he see in the near future that Ben Carson will make a suggestion to the Housing Board for any down payment first-time home buyers assistance like Obama did in 2008?
We don't know, but I think what Dr. Carson brings to the picture is, he grew up in a very difficult circumstances, and he realized there is a path to the American dream, and maybe he will look at all possible angles. Down payment assistance certainly helps many Americans transition from renting into ownership, and we have to assure that it is a successful ownership, not a case of people just suddenly able to own and later foreclose. We don't want to have repeat of the mistakes of just easy lending, but down payment assistance has been shown to work very well. So I think this is something that Secretary Carson should look very carefully at and make recommendations.
Comments on Twitter from C-SPAN Democrat, who tweets that we need to be renovating rather than demolishing inner city and other urban housing, and reaction to something you said, Mr. Yoon, saying housing construction definitely down, but don't forget when foreclosures skyrocketed. Let's get back to calls. Valdosta, Georgia. Here's on our homeowners line. Charles, welcome. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Yoon.
Morning.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that your predecessor, or maybe whoever was the lobbyist in 2007, 8, 9, he was also very supportive of the housing industry, and he never warned us about any kind of a bubble. So that lobbying group really has just, all they do is prop up the housing industry. And as a modest homeowner, I got tired of having to pay out, to suffer low rates on my deposits and having to bail out the rest of the economy and having to bail out homeowners who just used poor judgment and tried to buy the biggest houses they possibly could. That was just really tiresome. And I see the same thing going on now, starting from 2007 and 8 under the previous administration. So I think the government should get almost entirely out of the housing industry. The mortgage insurance deduction, all of that should just go away.
I'm going to ask you on his point, what's the future of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in a Trump administration?
Well, we have to recognize that home ownership rate used to be about 40% right after the Great Depression. And then there was the introduction of FHA mortgages, which enlarged the home ownership. It had worked very well. And furthermore, after the Second World War for the veterans, many of the Veterans Affairs mortgages also enlarged the pool of the home buying. And as a result, American home ownership went from 40% to 60%. Now, the caller is correct that we cannot have artificially fueled housing market where home ownership tried to reach the 70% through easy lending. I don't think anyone will say today condition is easy lending, and we don't want to have a repeat of that situation. But for home ownership rate to have fallen to a 50-year low from that, that's hollowing out the middle class. As regarding the Fannie and Freddie, they made a huge mistake during the bubble, creating a hedge fund which they bet the wrong way, and as a result, it cost the taxpayers. All the management has been changed. With the new management, they're going back to the historic role. Don't concentrate on hedge fund, concentrate on the homeowners, access to mortgages, and as a result, they have repaid all the bailout money to the Treasury, and they are still providing additional revenue for the Treasury. So the Fannie and Freddie, they provide that government guarantee of low mortgage rates. Mortgage rates today are 4.2. Without it, it may be much higher. And furthermore, the 30-year fixed rate mortgages may no longer be available more readily and make it more difficult. So Fannie and Freddie, they're much financially sounder because they're playing the old traditional role of focusing on homeowners rather than the hedge fund. So we believe that Fannie and Freddie should play a continued role in this manner.
Is your sense, if you talked about the Federal Reserve likely raising its basis rates in the coming years,
yes.
Let's say mortgage interest rates go up in 2017, is your sense that you're saying that more home construction, more supply, for in another term, will keep the market competitive for those first-time home buyers?
So we need job creation. So that's one. And second is that we need to assure that home prices do not outpace people's income. And way to accomplish that is to assure that we have more supply. So housing start currently is greatly inadequate in relation to the population growth. So if we can incentivize for more building activity, then the home values will rise much more moderately, keep it within the affordable range. Otherwise, home prices will just shoot up too high, too fast, and it will lead to even further lowering of home ownership rate.
Let's get a couple more calls to Austin, Texas, and Ruben's a renter there.
Hi, good morning, Lawrence. Thank you for taking my call. I had a quick question. So I live in Austin, which is kind of one of the cities that's kind of hit that affordability ceiling. Do you see anything as an impending bubble in that area, like compared to Brooklyn, Austin, San Francisco? And the second question is, do you feel like Ben Carson is probably the best candidate for the job for HUD?
Well, let me address the second question. The whole Trump administration wants to look at many new angles. So we have to wait and see what the new angles and new ideas will come from. So we will work with Secretary Carson. I'm sure he has some ideas, so we are excited that Ben Carson was confirmed. The second point related to the housing market bubble is that all indication, tight underwriting standards in the current environment, combined with the fact that there is no oversupply. The problem is undersupply, inventory shortage that's pushing up the prices. So this is simple economics of supply and demand that's pushing up the prices. But if we have more supply, it will lessen the price pressure to move upwards, and that's what we want. As to which city would have a bubble, I think the Austin market is very fine, just because even though prices are much higher than a few years ago, there's a lot of relations with workers transferring from San Francisco area, Denver area, Seattle area, and these are much higher price markets where people are migrating into Austin. And therefore, I would say if there is a bubble, I would first focus on the San Francisco Bay Area. If for some reason the technology sector goes down, I think the prices in the Bay Area inevitably will go down. Fortunately for that region, the technology sector continues to create high-paying jobs in that region.
Certainly another hot real estate area is Brooklyn. In New York, we hear from Jeannie on our homeowners line. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you for taking my call. He just got through talking about a bubble in real estate. We have one going on right now in Brooklyn, okay? But the point I want to get at is that I don't think that Ben Carson qualified. I think someone should be in charge of this housing situation with the FHA and the mortgage and what have you. A real estate person who understands what is about to take place. I really do feel that our president are putting people in charge of things that don't know anything about them so that he can dictate to them what he wants done. That's my personal feeling.
Well, the Department of Housing and Urban Development have professional staff. I mean, they've been in and focusing on the real estate consistently year in, year out. And Secretary Carson will be surrounded by these professionals. And so we'll see what type of goal or direction that Ben Carson can provide. We hope that he understands that home ownership is some 90% of Americans aspire to at some point in their life. Probably we will never get to the 90% home ownership rate, but trying to understand that the middle class housing wealth is important for the stability of the country. As long as there is that focus, there's many professionals within the department to guide Secretary Carson.
Lawrence Yun with the National Association of Realtors, and you can follow them on Twitter @Realtors. Thanks for being with us here on Washington Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Still more program ahead here. Follow them on Twitter @Realtors. Thanks for being with us here on Washington Journal.
Thanks for having me.
Still more program ahead here on C-SPAN and C-SPAN Radio. Next in our Spotlight on Magazine segment, Ann Kem of Washington Monthly explains the current cash bail system in the U.S. and what kind of impact it's having on communities. But first, Vice President Mike Pence made history during the March for Life by being the first vice president ever to address the group in person. Here's a portion of what he said yesterday.
The truth is being told. Compassion is overcoming convenience, and hope is defeating despair. In a word, life is winning in America because of all of you. So I urge you to press on. But as it is written, let your gentleness be evident to all. Let this movement be known for love, not anger. Let this movement be known for compassion, not confrontation. When it comes to matters of the heart, there is nothing stronger than gentleness. I believe we will continue to win the hearts and minds of the rising generation if our hearts first break for young mothers and their unborn children, and if we, each of us, do all we can to meet them where they are with generosity, not judgment. To heal our land and restore a culture of life, we must continue to be a movement that embraces all, cares for all, and shows respect for the dignity and worth of every person. Enshrined on the walls of the Jefferson Memorial are the words of our third president, who admonished us so long ago to remember that God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. On behalf of the President of the United States and my little family, we thank you for your stand for life. We thank you for your compassion. We thank you for your love for the women and children of America. And be assured, along with you, we will not grow weary. We will not rest until we restore a culture of life in America for ourselves and our posterity.